With that, welcome you inside our Big Ten Network studios in this edition of Big Ten Today. I'm Rick Pizzo. Typically, if you watch on Wednesdays, I'm joined here by my good friend Andy Katz. But every now and then, Andy, the world traveler that he is, always hard at work, can't make it back to Chicago because he was in Iowa City last night to watch the Hawkeyes knock off the Huskers. Once again, a court storm. And then Andy Katz is always present, but apparently, Andy, the pilots who were supposed to get you here to Chicago were not.
Yeah, my streak is snapped. I've had a great record of making sure after a game the night before, whether it's Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, of sitting right beside you or Dave or Kylan or Rick or Mike or whoever's there. Bottom line is you need pilots to fly a plane, and this morning at 6:30, there were no pilots. So I am joining you still from Cedar Rapids. But great to be here, as always, and talk about an unbelievable night in Big Ten men's basketball, including yet again, another storming that I was involved in.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in just a bit. Among Andy's many talents, we have learned flying is not among them, and everybody that was supposed to be on that flight this morning from Cedar Rapids is very happy that that's the case. It is time for today's big story as Michigan just keeps rolling on the road against a top 10 opponent in Purdue in a game that was never truly a game. The Wolverines jumped out early to double digits. It got to 20-plus in the first half. 6 players score in double figures. Purdue made a little run late, but Michigan now 25-1, 15-1 in the Big Ten. They have officially locked up that triple bye. They will not play until Friday at the quarterfinals in the Big Ten tournament. 6 AP-ranked wins already this season. That's tied for second in the country with Arizona. Only one team has more such victories this season. That would be the Duke Blue Devils. And fittingly enough, Michigan plays Duke this coming weekend in that rare February non-conference game in D.C. Andy, Michigan has been, for the better part of the year, the best team in college basketball. I know that Arizona was unbeaten and stayed at number 1 for much longer than Michigan has been there. But dating all the way back to November in those tournaments when Michigan was beating really good teams by 30 or 40, you look at this Michigan team, and we saw it again on Tuesday night, they simply do not have a weakness.
Yeah, and look, last week we talked, I was there for their game against Northwestern where they were down 16 and then suddenly flipped the switch. I've made this reference to sort of hockey lines, but it's true. I mean, they have 9 starters, and they just go with the hot hand, certainly on the perimeter. Elliot Cadeau was that again last night for them. I saw Seth Davis on our air last night say that maybe he is the MVP of this team, and he really has played like it at times. Just absolutely sensational again for the Wolverines. He had 17, 7 assists, and only 4 turnovers in this game against Purdue. You know, their front line is arguably the best in the country. Yaxel Lendenborg is a stat stuffer. He may win Player of the Year in the league because he does a little bit of everything. Adai Mara alters shots better than anyone, whether he blocks them or just disrupts them. And then Marez Johnson coming over from Illinois. I mean, it's been such a presence inside. And then, as I said, you just go down the line. I mean, they ended up having 13 threes, a number of different players contributing to those threes. They go 18 to 23 from the free throw line. They just did a little bit of everything, and Purdue just could never get over the hump. Yes, Braden Smith, and by the way, Trey Kaufman-Rin finally played, up to what we've expected from me at 27, but it just wasn't enough. I mean, Michigan's just simply better. And the shocking thing about Purdue is they've now lost 3 home games at Mackey that mattered. When I say that, I mean like games that we expected them to sort of step up. The Illinois game when Keaton Wagler had 46 when Illinois didn't even have Kylan Boswell. And then that game against Iowa State earlier in the season where they just absolutely got pummeled. That's what's really more shocking because we know how good a home court Mackey Arena is. And for Michigan just to be the latest elite team to come in there and win, it is really, really a red flag for Purdue right now.
It doesn't really matter where Michigan plays, road, neutral, away. I know the Northwestern game much closer than we expected. And you date back to the Nebraska win when the Huskers were shorthanded with no Rink Mass, no Braden Frager, and the Huskers led most of that game. But at the end of the day, that's the story. The closing chapter is that Michigan has found a way to win all these games. Quite simply, Andy, right now, are the Wolverines the clear favorite in your mind to give the Big Ten a national championship in men's basketball for the first time in more than a quarter century?
Yes. And here's the thing that, and obviously I don't want to jinx it, but I think this is the biggest difference because people forget we have had Big Ten teams make the Final Four and play for the national championship, whether it was Michigan State in '09, Illinois in '05, Wisconsin in '15, Michigan again in '13, and then of course Purdue a couple of years ago against UConn. But each one of those times, the Big Ten team was not sort of the overwhelming favorite going in. They've run into a juggernaut, whether that was Carolina or Villanova or Louisville or UConn. This time it's going to be Michigan that's going to be the juggernaut. Michigan will be the team to beat. They're going to be the number one overall seed, regardless what happens down the stretch with this game Saturday against Duke and DC or the remaining road games or even the Big Ten tournament. I just think that, first of all, they're not going to lose, as Matt Painter said last night. They're not losing 4 Big Ten games. Maybe they drop 1 or 2 more, maybe, and I'm including the Big Ten tournament and Duke, although I think they're going to potentially win them all. But they're going to go in as the number one overall seed. I think on Saturday in the Sweet 16, sort of the top 16 reveal that the Men's Basketball Selection Committee is going to put out, they're going to be the number one overall seed. And what does that mean? That means Michigan likely will be in Buffalo. Unfortunately for Wolverine fans, that probably is the closest place in the first weekend. But then they're going to be in Chicago as the Big Ten home team in Chicago, and they'll go from Chicago just down to Indianapolis. That's I'm not alone in predicting this, but I'm pretty confident that's what's going to happen.
Of course, the Boilermakers would like to get to Indy as well, where their fan base would certainly fill up Lucas Oil and the Final Four. But they have some issues to solve before we get to that point, Andy. You talked about losing at home, which has been a rarity now 3 times already this year. Overall, what do you think the biggest issue with Purdue is right now, and can it be solved before we get to tournament time?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, they were the preseason one, but again, we didn't know how good Arizona would be or Duke or even Michigan, obviously, with all these new pieces. But I just think they're missing something, whether that's like that Lance Jones type player who came in from Southern Illinois. They gave him that pop off the bench or that energy. They've got good players and they have plenty of talent, but I think they're just missing that something, that sort of that push, certainly from a bench player that can really come in with that second unit and provide that energy. And also part of the problem is their big 3 haven't played as well all at the same time. As I said, TKR had 27 last night, but he hasn't been consistent the same time that Fletcher Lawyer has been. When he's been off, maybe the other 2 are on and vice versa. Braden Smith obviously has been the most consistent player and arguably the best point guard in the country, but they need all 3 to play at their best. They need the bench to play, obviously, maybe above their means, if you will. And I just don't know if it's there for them. Can they get to the Final Four? Of course they can. They've got enough talent to do so. We never know how the bracket's going to play out. But what's going to hurt them is as we see more losses, they're going to lose that advantageous position that they would have had if they were a top 2-line seed.
They will be part of that top 16 when the NCAA committee reveals it, of course, on Saturday. Perhaps now maybe falling to a 3-line instead of a 2 had the result been different. But they will certainly be among the top 16. And like everybody else in the Big Ten, they have a really tough schedule for the remaining 2+ weeks before we see where they are headed to the Big Ten tournament in Chicago. And now it's time for us to get to where Andy was on Tuesday night. Carver Hawkeye, Iowa 57, Nebraska 52. First top 10 win for any Hawkeye team since March of 2022. And the Huskers simply don't lose games when they give up less than 60, but they lost this one. Andy is somewhere in that maelstrom of black and gold, avoiding trying to be run over by the Hawkeye fans. Andy, this was huge for Iowa in so many different ways, especially after the loss to Maryland and what the Hawkeyes still have remaining on their schedule. Because before they lost to the Terps, you looked at this team and thought, they're not in the bubble. You're not worried about the tournament. They're probably a single-digit seed. Then they lose to Maryland, and you start looking at the remaining slate and thinking to yourself, if it goes south, they could miss the tournament altogether. I think now they're back in that previous area where we thought they would be before, an 8, a 9, and feeling really good about their tournament future.
Yeah, no question about it. And now they're in a position to get a double bye, which obviously gives them even more of an advantageous position in the Big Ten tournament in Chicago, more than likely playing another quad 1 game on that Thursday. Look, Bennett Sturts, he's all Big Ten first team. He's a potential late lottery pick, and he just carried them. Ended up going with what he had 25. The team as a whole was 17 to 18 from the free throw line. But as I talked to him amid that chaos last night, and same with Ben McCollum, whenever they need someone to make a play, it's always Bennett Sturts. He relishes those positions, whether it's a three, a mid-range, getting to the free throw line. But I thought even more than that last night, what we saw from him was his defense. His defense on Price Sanford, who came back as sort of the leading player for Nebraska, where he played for a couple of years. His brother was a four-year player at Iowa. I mean, it was great. I mean, he was in those passing lanes, really frustrating Nebraska overall. I mean, they only scored 52 points, a Nebraska team that certainly can light up the scoreboard when they're on. So his defense, their overall defense, the fact that Iowa got this win after Nebraska had come all the way back to take a tiny lead was significant for the Hawkeyes. They needed to wipe away that loss to Maryland. And in talking to Ben McCollum yesterday during the day, I asked him about, when you were Drake, you kind of had to either be, and I know it was 1 year, but still, he knew that you had to finish first or second and win the Valley to get to the NCAA tournament. The Big Ten, you have the comfort of knowing if you finish 8th, 9th, you can still get in, and that's okay. But he said, no. I'm taking the mentality that it's essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, game sevens, sense of urgency every game. And he said, I like the pressure and the stress, and I want my players to feel that. A lot of coaches don't. He wanted his players to feel that kind of stress, and I think they played with it in a good way. It was good, stressful energy last night.
I don't think Bennett Sturts has a chance to win Big Ten Player of the Year. He'll be in the conversation for sure. I think Yaxel Lendeborg is probably the favorite. Keaton Wagler has put up huge numbers. But I'll make this statement. I don't think there's a player in this league that's more important to their team's success than Bennett Sturts is to Iowa. He never leaves the floor, and they need him to score, and they need him to score in volumes. As for Nebraska, Andy, after a 20-0 start to the season, it's not as if the wheels have completely fallen off. The Huskers have still found a way to win some important games. They're still in great shape to be a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, though obviously in danger of losing that if the last couple of weeks do not go the way that Fred Hoiberg wants. Right now, what do you think is the biggest difference between the Husker team that we saw in that 20-0 run and the Husker team we see right now, with the obvious answer being the level of competition notwithstanding?
I think they're a little beat down. During this stretch, remember Braden Frager was out with an ankle injury and Rick Mass wasn't healthy. We're in a situation here in late February where everyone knows everybody. Scouting is obviously, done to where we're going to shut off your best players. Nebraska feels like a team to me that needs to get out of the Big Ten right now and get into, sort of a neutral site games in the NCAA tournament. I'm confident they're going to break their streak of never winning an NCAA tournament game for the first time. Look at their schedule on the screen right here. So, yes, they lost to Maryland. But now when you look at what's ahead of them, these are games they should win. They should beat Penn State. They should beat Maryland, get reset, take care of business. That LA trip is really intriguing because they're catching, potentially, a USC team. We still don't know if Chad Baker-Mazar is going to come back. They're sort of all over the map. UCLA is going in the wrong direction. So that's a trip now, later in the season, where maybe they could at least get a split or sweep. And then you end the season home against Iowa, revenge game, senior night, by the way, for Sam Hoiberg. So I like their chances. I like their schedule. I think they're going to be fine with these 5 games when we see them in Chicago in a couple of weeks.
Totally agree with you. I think the schedule is absolutely perfect. And not only Penn State and Maryland are you big-time favorites just in terms of talent v. talent, but those games are at home. And, of course, the rematch against Iowa at home as well. Could easily see the Huskers 4-1 without much of a sweat, maybe even sweeping those 5 games. You sweep those 5 games, and you make a run in the Big Ten tournament, you're not worried about falling outside the top 4 in terms of seed lines. You're debating whether you're a 2 or a 3. 1 no longer really a possibility for Nebraska. But you get on that 2 or 3 line, you're in great shape to start thinking about a trip to the Sweet 16.